Um, so it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today, Lily Maynard and Rosamira Gillen. So Dr. Lily Maynard is the Director of Global Conservation at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden, spending years in zoos, including working as Conservation Programs Manager at Disney Animal Kingdom, instilled her passion for wildlife conservation. Lily has a master's and a doctorate in the human dimensions of wildlife conservation from the University of Florida. She leads collaborative planning and impact evaluation with global partners to advance conservation, inspire communities to join in and facilitate coexistence with wildlife. And joining Lily today is Rosamira. Rosamira Gillen was born and raised in Barranquilla, I hope I pronounced that correctly, in Colombia in South America. She's an architect with a master's in landscape architecture and an advanced degree in environmental management. She was formerly the executive director of the Barranquilla Zoo and is now the co-founder and executive director of Fundación Proyecto Titi, a non-profit organization leading efforts to secure a long-term future for cotton-top tamarins and the tropical forests that are home to this critically endangered species. Rosamira is a Whitley Award winner and a National Geographic Explorer. And today, between the two of them, they'll be discussing their paper that recently appeared in Conservation Science and Practice, entitled Can Creating Sustainable Livelihoods with Communities Impact Cotton-top Tamarin Conservation in Colombia? And with that, over to you, Lily and Rosamira, and yeah, I'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. It is a pleasure for me and Lily to share some of our work with you today and some of the learnings and the experiences and the challenges. So thank you for being here on behalf of everyone at Proyecto TT and all the partners supporting this work and in here in our country. Next. Okay, so we are connecting from Colombia, the only place on earth where you will ever find cotton-top tamarins in the wild. Just that little red dot in a huge map, and not even in the whole country, but only in that little black stripe that you see within the country of Colombia, the northwest region of our country. It's the only distribution area of these tamarins in the wild. Next. About in the mid-80s, Dr. Ann Savage came from the US to Colombia, to this beautiful place, to study the cotton-top tamarins in the wild, in the tropical dry forest of northern Colombia. Little was known about this species, and Dr. Savage basically established the first long-term study about this charismatic primate. And of course, in many years of following and monitoring in the wild, took us to learn a lot about this species. They are very similar to us humans, of course, primates, but live in family groups just like we do. Very territorial. Babies learn everything from their parents. They use a very sophisticated system for communicating for all different situations in the forest. Their diet is mostly based with fruits that grow seasonally in this forest, but they also do consume some sap from the tree trunks and also a good number of insects for protein. Next. But unfortunately, as many other wildlife species around our planet, cotton-top tamarins are facing quite many threats. And this we realized as we learn more and more about the species, we also learned about these threats that we're facing these animals, mostly related to deforestation for cattle ranching and agriculture in the rural areas of northern Colombia, but also selective logging for selling wood or for commercializing the big trees, and a lot also the use of local communities for domestic uses, such as firewood, fences, and construction as well. And one that is very troubling for us is the illegal pet trade of cotton-top tamarins in our country that still continues. Next. So all these threats basically have put cotton tops as a critically endangered species. we developed the first survey of cotton tops within the whole distribution area in northern Colombia, and estimated there's still about 7,000 cotton tops in the wild, but only there's left about less than 8% of their original forest cover within all of this area. And this 8% is highly fragmented. So we are basically now with a bunch of little islands of forest, bigger and smaller. And for a species that is arboreal, never comes down to the ground, that is a huge threat for them, especially for their long-term viability, genetic viability, and survival. Next. And while we, in many years of studying, learned a lot about the biology of the species, their behavior, and the ecology with the forest, that's where we realized that we needed to incorporate other elements within our conservation work, and that is the human element. And, so we went beyond science and forest conservation and expanded our efforts to engage local communities at different levels. So we put together education programs that would engage children at an early age in elementary school, and then in secondary school, and even, further as young individuals to work with us in protecting the species and basically creating a sense of pride, being this endemic species and very unique. But beyond that, we also needed to approach local communities. Very little people knew about cotton tops in Colombia, in our own country. Even myself, when I was a kid, I was never taught about cotton tops. And that uniqueness of the species was definitely important to communicate. So we created livelihood improvement programs that will be the focus of our talk today. Next. So when we realized that big part of the problem was the exploitation of forest resources for subsistence, we decided to create just a full line of work to provide income alternatives to local communities in order to reduce that need to depend on forest resources for subsistence and for the day-to-day life. And I'll briefly describe 4 of those programs that Lily will explain later on our study. And one of the most iconic one is the eco mochilas. These are beautiful handbags made with, next Lily, recycled plastic bags. many recycled plastic bags. One of these big bags that you saw on the previous slide, fixes about 300 regular sized plastic bags. So many plastic bags have been used to produce the eco mochilas. Next. Communities collect the eco mochilas, then they collect the plastic bags from the source in the communities, and we have developed many campaigns. They cut them in stripes, as you see, it's like basically plastic thread. Then they crochet that plastic thread into this beautiful artwork that we call eco mochilas, and that has provided, for about 16 years, benefits to many people, many artisans in our community. Next. Later on, we created the plush toy program because you could not find the plush toy of cotton top in Colombia, and not too many places either. So we created one pattern, and then the ladies came up with different models and sizes, being very creative. And this was another livelihood of income improvement opportunity for the local communities in the towns where we work, around the forest where we work. Next. In that same line of working with low investment materials or waste, we also created an opportunity for locals to collect and recycle plastic, which we would then grind in this machine and take to a manufacturer to melt and make fence posts that were made from all that recycled plastic. Next.
Wow.
So that we would avoid having to use wooden posts for fences, which is a common practice in Colombia and in many places around the world. But little by little, try to reduce that. And this is the reason why so many young trees are cut from the forest to make these fences, which with the temperature and the heat here get all rotten very quick, and they have to be replaced all the time. And some of these fence posts, as you see, are fencing the protected areas that we are creating with the community and with our reserves in order to reduce the use of wood for this purpose. That also involved increased community participation in alternatives for income generation. Next. And then our following program was also related with farmers. So farmers in the local areas are basically used to doing slash and burn. And it's common that it gets out of hand and then it becomes a problem. So we created conservation agreements with local farmers that own their land. And the agreement was very simple. They set aside about 10% of their property for us to come and plant trees to restore the forest and create or establish connectivity between forest fragments. And in turn, they received support, technical assistance, seeds, poultry, honey harvesting, different opportunities to make their land more productive. And under that agreement, then they improved their income and livelihood, and we were able to create new forested areas that would, in the future, would connect isolated forest patches for cotton tops and for wildlife in general. Lily, I think I'll turn it over to you to talk a little more about the study after providing this context.
Thank you, Rosamira, and thanks so much for the detailed photos and descriptions of these 4 exceptional programs. Proyecto GT has invested so much great work into these 4 different programs that are engaging and mobilizing the local rural communities in Colombia to provide sustainable livelihoods, alternatives to using natural resources, and also hoping to engage and promote more of a strong attitude towards conserving cotton tops. So I joined Rosamira, her team, and our partners in the evaluation in this study, and that's what the focus of this study is, to assess whether these livelihood programs achieve those goals of really making a difference in supporting livelihoods in those target communities, as well as promoting a conservation attitude and enhanced conservation practices to help the cotton top tamarins and preserve their forest habitat. And so this study involved a series of steps that I'll outline here and then go into a little more detail for those of you interested. We first convened a group of partners from different organizations, and we specifically included a third-party evaluator. We hired Impact by Design, who some folks from Impact by Design are on this call as well, so if you have questions for them later. But they were an exceptional third-party evaluator that came in to help consult on this evaluation so that any insights or expectations from an outside perspective were heard as we developed the study and throughout the data collection, analysis, and discussion and really applications of these results. And so convening the Proyecto GT team with these external evaluators, experts, and our team at Disney's Animal Kingdom, partners with Proyecto GT, we got started to really develop a theory of change for each of the 4 programs. A theory of change is a results chain, an outline of our expectations and our assumptions of what we expect to happen after these programs are started and the consequences and potential impacts that hopefully they will promote for the participants and for the communities. And so then for each of those expected outcomes, we then designed and wrote survey questions to be able to measure whether those anticipated outcomes were achieved. And in order to then assess whether they were achieved, we prepared this survey to be shared with our participants in these programs, as well as non-participants for comparison. So as you can see here, our survey was done in person through interview style in the rural communities in Colombia, like in the photos below, with the really tedious and long work of lots of surveys and interviews of 254 interviews is an exceptional amount of work, and I'm so impressed by the team that was able to get that done. And to look a little deeper into one example of a theory of change, this is the theory of change for the Eco Mochila program, the bags that are created and crocheted from the waste plastic bags. But if you're interested in the theory of change for the other 3 programs, those can be found in the supplemental materials in the paper that we published online. So feel free to dive deeper if you're interested. But as an outline, a theory of change starts with the implementation of the program, and you can see it immediately results in what we expect are some impacts for increasing of skills and access to resources for the participants, as well as to encourage them to be able to build and create these products and start to influence later on and subsequently through the results chain their perceptions of cotton top tamarins and their perceptions of the value of conserving the tamarins, of protecting the forest, of creating a clean habitat, and that the results of collecting these plastic bags and then converting them into a product that they can then sell. In addition to those conservation-focused steps, we also expected that the women artisans who are participating in this program would develop business management skills, would develop access to more resources that would then they would have agency over, and that would lead to increased well-being for themselves and their families, and more sense of an empowerment with control over their lives and their abilities. So those are the series of steps that we expected, which would then lead into an influence on the reduction of the threats to the cotton tops that Rosamira shared, whether it's the plastic waste in the forest and throughout these communities, as well as reducing the amount of forest products and the amount of trees used for income generation, with this instead an alternative. And then also the reduction in the number of tamarins sought out as pets. And so by reducing these threats, we then, through this theory of change, expect and hope for the outcome of increased conservation of cotton tops. And so with this theory of change, and then the 3 others for the 3 other programs, we came up with our survey questions. And so here are 2 examples from the 2 different kind of higher level categories of our survey. From the income and well-being focused questions, we asked such questions like, to what extent have you experienced an increase, decrease, or stable amount of income in the past few years? And then when looking at the conservation attitude questions, we asked questions like, to what extent do you agree, disagree, or are neutral towards statements like, I know people who have tamarins in their home. And so with this latter question, you can see that we're asking knowledge and awareness statements with a neutral frame. We're not asking directly, do you have a tamarin in your home? Because this is potentially, well, definitely from our perspective, an illicit behavior. And there is the risk that we could be biasing the survey or the respondents' ability to be honest if they do have a pet tamarin at home. So instead, we wanted to ask these neutrally focused questions and framed questions in order to allow for more honesty about whether they are aware in their community or in their region of this, of people having tamarins in their home or the like, rather than leading to issues of defensiveness if we ask directly about illicit behaviors. And so then across the board, all of these questions, we're looking for the level of agreement or disagreement, as well as the influence and results of change over the past few years for those income and well-being. And we needed to then have some comparison groups set up. So we purposefully sampled the individuals who are currently participating in the 4 programs that we're evaluating. And so that included many different people in the different communities for the 4 programs. But we also wanted to compare and understand their influence or the spread of potential benefits to their neighbors. So that means people in the same rural community as the participants, but who are not themselves involved in the income generating program, haven't gone through the training, haven't talked very much directly with the PFGTT staff, and aren't receiving access to those benefits directly. We needed a 3rd comparison group, though, in order to assess the potential for development and growing change in the communities over time throughout the region of Northern Colombia. So we also included reference communities, that is, similarly sized and similar communities with similar demographics in the region that PreFGTT does not have any work going on, does not have any interventions present, in order to have a more neutral comparison group to be able to assess what is change over time that might be happening across the region, and what is changed and what we could attribute to these specific programs with pre-ecto TT. And with these different comparison groups set up, you can see here in this table the distribution of our different respondents. Like I said, we had a lot of surveys and interviews, and we have on the left-hand side the 4 different programs, the different sustainable livelihood programs, as well as further down the number of neighbors that we interviewed and their reference community comparison sites with 100 people in entirely different communities used as comparison. One thing to note, the pre-ecto TT programs have purposefully tried to target diverse people in the community, both men and women, based on what is culturally appropriate for these different types of activities and as opportunities for different livelihoods. So the Eco Mochila and the plush toy programs, you can see, specifically target women. And that's why earlier I brought up some of the metrics around women's empowerment and access to resources. Alternatively, the practice of being a farmer and managing the land is culturally more appropriate for men. And so the participants of that program and the agreements not to gain access to resources and reduce their pressure on the forest is engaging all men. In the middle, we have the plastic recycling program that then generates those TT posts to reduce the tree's pressure for that fencing. And that is a less skilled and wide open to anyone who wants to participate. And so you can see that it includes both men and women. And so that's why we also included both men and women in our neighbor sample and the reference community. Now let's look at some of the results. We're excited to be able to see initially, in looking with chi-squared tests for significance and looking for differences between comparing these different comparison groups, that the participants of the program, the people actively involved in the program, had significantly more access to more income and well-being resources than their neighbors and the reference communities. And so right away, being able to say that we were able to demonstrate and document that the participants have increase in income, as well as more agency and ability to utilize such income and resources to go to the doctor or to help their family members. We heard anecdotally a lot of qualitative, great description about parties that people were able to have, and as well as buying water, buying medicine, being able to support school fees and more. So you can look in the paper for more of a deep dive. But it's really amazing to be able to see that the participants were able to get more income in more recent years than their neighbors or the reference communities. And now looking at what these programs and their influence on the attitudes towards conservation of the forest resources and the tamarins. With the asterisks on the right, you can see I've marked where there are significant differences between the groups. So at the top, you can see that there's agreement across the groups that the importance of moderating use of forest products and protecting the forest is a widespread agreed idea, no matter whether it's a participant in the program, a neighbor, or the reference community. Also, you can see next that all of the groups were similar in their agreement or their disagreement towards the idea of having tamarins at home, meaning they're supportive of the idea of leaving tamarins in the wild and conserving them. But it gets a little more interesting as we get into questions about their awareness of prevalence of different behaviors towards tamarins in the community. For example, the participants and the reference communities saw similar numbers, were shared at a similar rate, that they know people who have tamarins in their home, while the neighbors were less likely to share that. Also, the participants shared much more often that they know people who capture tamarins to then sell them in the illegal pet trade. And finally, we can see at the bottom that if the participants and the neighbors were similar, but much higher than the reference communities in stating that they intend that if they ever see someone selling a tamarin, that they would report it. And so that intention to report is much less prevalent in the reference communities than in the sites where pre-ecto TT is working. And so this is an interesting trend that we're seeing, and I want to dive a little deeper into interpreting these findings with you all. Overall, like I said, across all 4 of the programs, whether it's eco-mochilas and plush toys, the conservation agreements with the farmers, and the plastic recycling, they all led to significant boosts in income and well-being for the program participants. Like you can see the 4 artisans making the eco-mochilas in the photo below. Also, however, we did see that those benefits and resources did not necessarily spill over and reach their neighbors in the same community. They were held more by the participants and not always shared or spread naturally without any form of intervention. And as a result, this led to a recommendation as a result of this study for Proyecto TT to consider how an enhanced educational or social marketing campaigns could be useful to further spread and encourage improved attitudes towards conservation of cotton tops throughout these communities. Additionally, we saw that there's widespread support for some conservation concepts. All the respondents tended to agree that tamarins are not good to have in their home. Overall, we also could see the success of Proyecto TT's influence on the participants and the neighbors when the reference community was significantly less likely to report if they see someone selling a tamarin. But we also really could see that there's some opportunities for enhanced reinforcement, for adapting Proyecto TT's community engagement programs to be able to further promote impact and cotton top conservation. For example, the participants shared that they know significantly more people capture tamarins more than the neighbors or the reference community shared. Perhaps that means that the participants of these programs are more on the lookout for it because they've been influenced by their participation in the program, but it also emphasizes that the illegal wildlife trade could still be a major presence in these communities and could need additional influence to try to reduce that pressure. And so overall, some widespread community engagement beyond the participants of these specific income generating programs has the potential to further spread these ideals and emphasize ways that conservation behaviors can be promoted. Now I'm going to turn it back to Rosamira to talk a little bit about how, after the results of this extensive evaluation has been applied in the programs for Proyecto TT's efforts throughout the community.
Thank you so much, Lily. Yes, this study provided very, very valuable information for us as feedback to improve the reach and the impact of our conservation work, and with the same intent to engage people and commit them to not supporting the pet trade or supporting or being ambassadors to forest resource conservation. A few points that we have already applied to our follow-up programs has been expanding more our education efforts to the local community and not only to the schools where we have been working for over 10 years with elementary and secondary school students. And actually, COVID has provided a great opportunity for us to implement some of these ideas, such as a radio show in the local community station where we encourage participation of those community participants that have been a part of our work over the years, or leaders, environmental leaders, the young leaders that have grown their knowledge with us over the years, and combine that with contests and incentives for people to participate in this radio. It's a talk show, so it's very dynamic, we should say, and encourage participation and convey the message insistently, you know, of cotton tops not being, or it's not good to have cotton tops as pets. We, as the Day of the Cotton Top Tamarin is another strategy that we have been using and we hope to improve once COVID allows us to do, is another opportunity to engage communities in a very artistic gathering full of music and food and dancing, which is very, very culturally appropriate for our communities in Northern Colombia. And also our education program for adults, it was also a result of this study, good feedback, so that we can make sure that participants of this livelihood improvement alternatives perfectly understand the connection between their work and cotton top tamarin forest conservation. So we are stressing before and after so that we can measure that change, exploring the social values, understanding the connections, and of course, increasing knowledge about the species. Next, Lily. And one of the new programs that we have been implementing or started implementing before COVID was an ecotourism, community ecotourism offer, where we provide the opportunity to visitors to see the monkeys in the wild and also to interact with our community members, interact with the artisans, play a little with crocheting with a plastic thread, and also interacting with the farmers, sometimes harvesting some of the fruits, just make it very experience-based, but at the same time, with a stronger component on education of the community members participating in this program, and also so that we can document and make sure that those connections are made strong and that knowledge is increased in the participants, instilling value and benefits for them and for us, of course, in creating these programs. So it's been really valuable for us. We are incorporating these learn or key findings within our programs, and we'll continue to do that as we see results and changes compared to our original study. Next. So we really want to invite you to learn more if you're interested, and we'll give you some key points that you can do to learn more about our work. And of course, follow us on social media and share our content, if you feel like it. You can also support the artisans that make these beautiful plush toys and eco mochilas, purchasing at our website, proyectodt.com, or just simply choose Proyecto DT as your preferred nonprofit when you purchase in Amazon using Amazon Smile. You can also donate on our website. And whenever it is safe to do so, please come and visit and just have a once-in-a-lifetime experience connecting with our communities, our kids, and of course with cotton top tamarins. Next. And of course, I want to acknowledge, as Lily was saying, this was a huge effort from the partner organizations that participated in this study, and we're eternally thankful to all of them, and also to our team who, like Lily said, it was many hours of field work, and then of course the processing of all the information to come up with this result. It was also a huge effort. We're very thankful, and we are here for you to answer your questions. Thank you so much for your attention and for being here today.
Thank you, Rosamira. Thank you, Lily. That was great.
Thank you.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, but maybe let's see if there's anybody with a burning question that they'd like to maybe kick questions off with and ask in person.
Feel free to unmute yourself or even turn on your camera if you want.
Maybe while people get their thoughts organized. I was quite interested by the lack of spillover from the participants to the neighboring communities. And so I suppose a two-part question. Part one is, how did you decide which community to involve as participants in the project as part one?
I think that one's for you, Rosamira. How did you decide where the interventions, where the participants would be selected?
Well, we basically are the way we choose our communities where to work is basically communities that are around or close enough to protected areas where we focus our field research and forest conservation efforts. So we basically take our education and community programs into those communities around the forest to have a direct, people that have a direct impact on or a potential direct impact on the forest resources that we're trying to conserve. So we chose the communities based on those communities that had participated in either of the programs, Ecomochila, Plush Toy, the fence posts, or the conservation agreements, and chose a sample from the active participants, and then of course, a core of other participants of the. We currently have 2 main fields start in a 3rd site. So those communities around those areas in northern Colombia, that was our universe.
Okay.
And of course, in the reference communities, were communities that were similar in size and that went within a further away area from our communities, but had the same basically social and economic conditions as participant communities.
Okay. And then for the sort of link to that is, have you detected that there's any kind of ill feeling from the neighbors who are not having the benefit compared to the participants? I mean, I worked in the Arabian Oryx Sanctuary in Oman previously, and the project was focused on a particular tribe, and with time, kind of as population expanded and ranged over a larger and larger area, it's ranged into neighboring tribes' land. And it very soon started causing issues for the entire project. And so I was wondering if there's perhaps some ill feeling or similar things that you're starting to pick up?
Mm-hmm. No, we did not. We have not identified any issues related to that. We have always been open to participation from any community member who wants to join. In the beginning stages of the Ecomochila program and the plush toys, we invited, openly invited community members to come to the workshops and to the trainings. And even afterwards, we conducted those periodically for those 2 projects because they're skilled. I mean, you need the skills to be able to participate. And some people decided not to participate, but it was voluntary. And either because they didn't have the skills or they didn't have the time or they just weren't into it. But we, I don't believe any along the years we have worked in community have felt any rejection to any of the programs or any ill feeling, because it's voluntary. If you want to participate, there's an opportunity for you to do that. But if you don't, that's okay too, and we can just be friends.
Okay.
And neighbors.
Thank you. So there's a couple of questions in the chat, and if people want to ask their questions in person that they've posted in the chat, they're welcome to do so. First one is from Claudia Schooner. Claudia, do you want to unmute and ask directly?
Yes, I can unmute, but the connection is not very good, so I'll skip the video, and there are more beautiful people around than me, so it's not necessary to see me. You were asking the people to reply and give an idea on the extent of benefit or not benefit, and did they have kind of a scale they could use, or could they just according to their personal feelings say we had a really great benefit or just a small benefit, or did you not evaluate that and just sort of better, worse, or equal than before? Mm-hmm. And a very great talk. Thank you very much. That was very interesting and amazing to see. I wonder if you have a sort of recipe on how to do these polls that could be, I think, benefit many conservation projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Your question is very helpful and important to acknowledge that the questions that we put in the slide were very wide open and open for interpretation. And so what we presented today is, and what we presented in the paper, is the quantitative comparison of the answers from the 3 comparison groups, where they stated whether they had an increase in income, it has stayed the same in the past few years, or it has decreased. we purposefully had it be a 3-part Likert scale choice in order to conduct the initial comparison between the different groups with a big enough sample size for us to see what's the overall tendency and change in income, change in access of resources for well-being overall. What we didn't present in this talk or in the paper that would have made it much, much longer and maybe too long to be published in Conservation Science and Practice is the additional qualitative data. And the reason why these interviews and surveys were such an amazing amount of work and an exceptional success was because we also went into the great detail with each of the participants and documented what from their perspective, what has changed in their life, what have they been able to do, or what agency do they have to then utilize those resources. And so then we have a lot of qualitative discussion and quotes and interpretation that PREFTTT has used even further in their applying to their programs and how they work with these communities, but we did not include this in this paper in order to not have it be the several 100-page report that I believe it was when we first initially finished this paper project.
Right, thank you. Yeah, amazing amount of data, and I guess very difficult partly to evaluate and compare. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so then for that qualitative assessment that again wasn't presented here, we really dove deeply into what are the patterns and experiences within each of the 4 programs.
Yeah.
The Ecomochila program is very different than the farmer engagement program, for example. But in order to scale up and do this overall comparison about just trends and changes as a result across the community and in comparison with another, that's why we had these high-level direct comparison with more simplified questions.
Okay, thank you.
And in regards to your question, Claudia, about a recipe or a process, I would encourage you to reach, or any of your partners to reach out to Impact by Design. It was exceptional, the amount of training that they were able to guide us through in this process in order to conduct a very elaborate and thorough evaluation that included these comparison groups that I'm not familiar with in other conservation evaluation efforts. And that's why I think it was so successful.
Thanks. Thanks very much.
Mark, I see that you've got a question. Would you like to go?
Yeah, just a follow-up from the previous question, and great talk, by the way. So early on in the talk, you mentioned about how the forest is fragmented, and one presumes that not all portions of the tamarin range are equally suited for the conservation of the species. And I'm wondering, this isn't really the focus of your work, but I'm wondering if you have the opportunity to look at that differential landscape of potential conservation and focus community programs to sort of leverage where you might most likely see tamarins persist. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe is Anne connected?
Anne is here, and so we're going to turn to Dr. Anne Savage, who was a major player in this project, but wasn't one of the presenters. I don't know, Anne, would you like to take the first response to that lovely question from Mark?
Sure. Mark, when we actually selected the areas where we worked, we tried to find sort of the largest amount of habitat where it was safe for us to work and had good receptivity by the community, sort of very accepting of us wanting to work there. And so we have these 2 sites. Our 3rd site follows that same criteria. And so given the long history of this program, as you know, the political situation has been a little dicey in certain ranges of Colombia. Some of those areas have larger tracts of forest, but they're not exactly very safe for us to work. So we've really focused our efforts on areas where there are large expanses or as large a forest as we can hope for in these regions that are safe for our team to work at, where communities are very accepting.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Is there anybody that has a question that's not been posted in the chat? You're welcome to go. I was wondering, Rosamira, in the meantime, how does one sustain such a program in the long term? If we we think on how we generally operate in society of, everybody wants more money, consume more, is that a concern going forward?
For us, of course, yeah, that's always something in the back of our minds to project our project in the long term and the sustainability of the project. We have been able to work in a way, on a project-based format where we guarantee the funds for certain activities, and then we develop them and we adjust, expand or contract based on the funds that are available. That used to be at the beginning very common trend for us, but we have been very lucky to find very long-term partners such as Business Conservation Fund, the Wildlife Conservation Network, many of the zoos around the world. And those organizations allow us to continue going and to create some basic stability for our most critical activities in each one of those programs. And then it's just permanently doing the grant cycles and expanding, finding funding opportunities from all different sources. The opportunities with the Whitley Award and Nat Geo have also been very beneficial for us with regards to institutional support as well. But yes, there's always outside threats and people wanting to consume and use more forest resources is always I think it's a challenge for everybody working in conservation. Our hope in the long term is that at the community level, where we are impacting and providing these benefits, people understand that or increase the value of the forest. And it may not be the cotton tops for the farmers, it may be the forest that provides water and safety for their families. And then we stress on that with this audience, and then basically adapt our speech with different audiences to make it relevant for them in the context that we are able at least to control a little more on keeping stability in the forest areas for cotton-top tamarins. Our hope in the long term is also to expand to a more regional level and create a larger corridor in between two of the sites where we are, which is a very ambitious goal. But with everything we have learned with regards to forest restoration and with the emphasis for the next 10 years on ecosystem restoration and potential funding sources for that, we might be able to find good partnership to continue on and then generate a larger scale impact for, we use cotton tops as a symbol, but we know that forest that we're saving for cotton tops is protecting the habitat of many, many other species that are part of Colombia's amazing biodiversity. So as long as we're able to also use the Colombian law that obliges companies to compensate for their environmental impact and make that happen into the ground, and our hope is that we can find that balance from outside threats and inside threats or with the funding.
And if I can also jump in and shout out to Rosamira and her team from an outside perspective, I really appreciate, through doing this project with Proyecto TT, the extent to which I've seen their intent to train and focus on training specific participants in the program, but also to encourage those participants to have ownership of their own program, right, independent of Proyecto TT's management and guidance. The artisans for the Eco Mochila program and for the plush toy program, for example, have ownership, have their own organization, have their own structure for coordinating with each other. And that has grown in a more sustainable fashion than if it was a program contingent on Rosamira's time and the Proyecto TT Conservation Org facilitating every step every day. As such, those programs have really grown. These artisans themselves have won awards. They have built partnerships with Colombian fashion designers. So in addition to the designs that they come up with, Colombian fashion designers now employ them to make certain bags in different styles and then sell those in the city. And that's really amazing, that growth that can grow independently of one conservation organization really emphasizes to me that these efforts are organic and engaging, and then allow for a more sustainable approach so that then PreActiviTT can turn to more of the reforestation efforts and connecting and engaging in new communities like they are to build these corridors between the patches and help to really reduce the threats to tamarins.
Thank you, Lily, for adding that. And I want to add as well that there's been a lot of learned lessons along the way since we started our first, structured community programs with the Ecomochila 16 years ago. And we are very good at, hitting ourselves hard and providing ourselves feedback as we go so that we learn from things that have worked very well and things that have not worked. And avoiding the dependence on communities from the main organization has always been a challenge, like Lily was saying, and has been a big learned lesson. So we're always exploring ways as we move further to create a format where communities can take ownership and move on, even though our presence in the territory helps be advisors, friends, and colleagues more than anything. So that's been a good experience as well. But a long way to learn that as well.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat. You're welcome to unmute and simply ask.
Martin, I had one more, which is maybe a bit of a mean question, because I saw your question regarding, do you know anybody who might have a tamarin at home? And I would expect, like, from the question that nobody would say, yeah, I know 10 neighbors and I can give you the names. So the question is, are there some questions where people just answer what they think is either most convenient or is actually what the interviewer expects? And how you sort of have precautions to at least be aware of it, and then evaluate the replies accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. That is a very important bias and potential risk in these types of surveys when talking about a potential illegal behavior. It can be a very strong tendency that there could be a bias to just have people lie or say what's convenient in order to protect themselves. And that's not a bad thing, that's just a natural tendency. And so we were aware of that in the design, and we purposefully trained the interviewers, the team that was doing the interviewers, in a process of training for how they ask their questions and for the process of anticipating the potential bias in order to try to alleviate some of that pressure. We also weren't using this as the fact-finding survey to say, now tell me who do you know and we're going to go arrest them or something. It was purposefully set out in the parameters of the interview as a honest and no threats or any risks involved for the interviewee. And as well, we allowed for them to also not answer a question if they didn't want to, just following those best interview practices. And so we would, if we wanted to go into a much deeper dive of exactly using the community as informants to find however many cotton-top tamarins there might be in captivity or in people's homes, that would be a different type of survey, because
very difficult.
Yeah, we would need to be asking questions in a different way. There are ways that I've read about, for example, in Uganda, where you can ask questions, but you don't know necessarily which answer they are giving in order to create a safe barrier between folks. Jennifer Solomon's work out of Colorado State University has done that, where you can literally, the interviewee and interviewer have a barrier so that they feel safe in answering these questions. And then later you get the results independent of the people's names who were answering. It can get complicated, but it's important to consider. So, but just to also add PreActiviTT recognizes that once an animal is in the home, once it's been there for a while and been fed at home or is habituated to being with people, it's PreActiviTT does not have in its activities going in and collecting these animals. Enforcement is not of the law, is not one of the organization's activities. And having a rehab center for these animals is a very unwieldy effort to get started. So those are not within the scope of the organization, because they can't then go and catch those animals and then take them and then re-release them necessarily. They need to be released or be with their family group. And so because of that, that's how we try to alleviate those potential pressures on those questions.
Okay, thank you.
Lily, I would like to add as well that there was, like Lily stressed, there was a lot of training from our team. Our team is many of them half of them are from the local communities, or so they're Colombian, and the accent was very appropriate for the region. We did not exhibit any logos of our organization while conducting the question and the interviews, just to avoid that. And also there was an intensive training on how to ask the questions so that we wouldn't influence the answer. And you know, that's I want to also recognize the work of Impact by Design and Amiel and her team for helping us get to a point where we could reduce that to the max.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat, and we're just about on time, so maybe I can slip in one last one, and that is this kind of survey that you've reported on here. Do you envisage this as a once-off thing in these particular communities, or is it something that you think you may have to revisit every 5 years, every 10 years to kind of see how things are going?
Martin, do you mean the message that we convey? Did I get that right?
No, the actual survey.
Well, I know that Proyecto.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Lily. Go ahead.
Okay, I know that it is within Proyecto TT's strategies to do periodical evaluations like this in order to assess and make sure that the programs don't get complacent or less impactful. This isn't, if it's a critically endangered species, this is an urgently needed level of impact that needs to stay consistent. And so the strategies require periodic continuation. It might not be the exact same survey if with the additional new programs that are now engaging beyond livelihood participants, but instead reaching community members with the radio program, adult education programs, children's training programs, all sorts of new things that Proyecto TT is doing. Now they would also add additional questions for the neighbors to see if those messages and the increased attitude and knowledge and intent to act in a friendly way towards cotton tops is spreading throughout the community.
Yeah, and it helped a lot. The study helped us a lot to make sure that when we are providing education and training for participation in these community programs, that what the expected behaviors or attitudes that we want to achieve are clear from the beginning. So we want people not to have cotton tops, and we want people to tell us when somebody has a cotton top so we can work with the authorities to, rescue the animal. And, when you have all those objectives clear from the beginning, then some survey questions might change based on the objective particular of each of the projects. That was very helpful as well to focus more the intent of the studies. We have some monitoring that is conducted yearly on certain aspects of each one of the programs, but this overall survey, probably like Lily mentioned, would have to be revisited every time based on the context and how things are changing in each of the communities.
Okay, thank you very much. I think with that we've come to the end of our session today. There are no more questions. And I just want to thank both of you, Lily, Rosamira. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your willingness to participate. I know it's not just a matter of showing up and just sharing a screen. So thanks for the time that you spent in preparing too. And it was a really interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Yes. And thank you for listening.
That's a pleasure. And thanks also to everyone who joined us today and for the interesting questions. I can maybe, just before we log off, I can maybe just remind you that next week, Wednesday, in the same time slot, there's another presentation another seminar, and this time by Maria Pascual and Jacob Phelps. And that will be based on a paper in conservation biology, and that is building a global taxonomy of wildlife offenses. So please do join us next week. Hope to see at least some of you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
goodbye.
Bye-bye.